Hello, this is Joe Trahan, welcoming you to the All Me podcast from the Taylor Hooten Foundation, whose mission is to enlighten the world to the truths about appearance and performance-enhancing substances. As the national leader on this subject, they communicate their educational messages through various methods, including this podcast. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show.
Hey guys, Brian Parker here, back as your host for another episode of the All Me podcast. And I'm really excited for today's episode because we get to dive into one of my favorite sports, and that is baseball. Specifically, we're going to talk about the hallowed grounds of the National Baseball Hall of Fame. It's a place that many players strive to get to, but few end up actually arriving at. So in this episode, we're going to go behind the scenes of the Hall with Tim Mead, who has spent 40 years working in baseball and is now the current president of the Hall of Fame, which is located in Cooperstown, New York. Tim was named to this position last summer, and he oversees the daily operation of the Hall, whose mission is to preserve history, honor excellence, and also connect generations. Many of you might have visited the Hall before. It was first opened in 1939, and since then has welcomed 17 million visitors through their gates. So we're going to talk with Tim about the mission of the Hall of Fame, what can be seen there, and also his thoughts on known steroid users potentially entering the Hall at some point. We're also going to talk with Tim about his career with the Los Angeles Angels organization, which is where he was before the Hall of Fame. He spent 40 years there, starting as an intern with the PR department and working all the way up the top of the chain, including his final 22 years as the team's vice president of communications. So in that role, Tim oversaw all the team's media relations, their publicity departments, as well as their broadcasting operations. While Tim was there, he oversaw the media for a variety of postseason appearances, for a couple of different All-Star games, and also for the Angels' 2002 World Championship, which he will tell us all about. So we're going to talk with Tim about those experiences, how he got into baseball, what was it like working for Gene Autry, what was it like working within the steroid era of baseball, and ultimately, we will discuss how the two of us got connected when he helped us secure one of our very first All Me Advisory Board members. So let's head to the Hall and welcome Tim into the show. Tim, thanks for joining us. Welcome to the show. How are you today?
Brian, great to be with you. Everything's good on this end, and I've been looking forward to the opportunity to speak with you.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to it as well, and maybe in a selfish way because I'm a baseball fan. I'm a baseball nut, so to speak, right? It's one of my favorite sports. And even before I started working with the Taylor Hooten Foundation, I actually worked in baseball a little bit as well, not nearly as long as you did. So I'm excited to get to know you a bit and learn about all the experience you've had in baseball and what you're doing in Cooperstown as well. So thanks again for spending some time with us. And we're going to dive into all of that, all your time in Major League Baseball, what you're doing now. But I guess as a starting point, what I always like to do on these talks is learn a little bit about your background. I always kind of say, hey, if you can kind of sum up your early years, real quickly, that's where I like to start. So I guess let's do that. Tell us a little bit about like where you grew up and where you went to school, and essentially what was kind of your career path leading up to what you do now at the Hall.
Well, I appreciate it. I'll give you the Reader's Digest. Sometimes I could be a little lengthy, but
that's fair.
I was blessed from the outset. I was adopted in Athens, Greece. My dad was in the military, and they went through a process and went to an orphanage there. Was about 6 months old. Ended up traveling to outside of London, spent 2 years while he was in the Air Force, and then we came back to the States. So I grew up in Tyndall Air Force Base, Florida, outside of Fort Myers. Eventually, we transferred to Arlington, Virginia, where my dad was stationed at the Pentagon. And then it was really there in Virginia that I started the love affair with baseball. I think it was probably 8 when I went to the first baseball game with the Senators in a Yankee game. Just absolutely fell in love with looking at this big backyard when you first walk through those portals and see the field. We moved to California in '69 and drove cross country. And the first night we were there, we sat around the Foot Locker in the kitchen on mats and had some K-rations that my parents had gone to the commissary to pick up. And we listened to Dick Enberg on the radio with the Angels, and I was hooked. On day one, I was hooked as an Angel fan. But I ended up going to college at Cal State San Bernardino, struggled there a little bit. Went to San Bernardino Valley College and later transferred. The best decision I ever made was Cal Poly Pomona. And I met a legendary coach, John Scalinas, best man at my wedding. My best friend and I were roommates along with two others, including Daryl Miller, who ended up playing for the Angels. And, to fast track everything, really, Brian, to tell you the truth, I started writing letters to all the major league clubs and the football teams, actually, as a 10th grader. And I still have the collection of responses I received about going to college, getting your education and all. I wrote letters to the clubs at that point to learn. And then subsequently, I wrote letters to the Angels. I had 3 rejection letters in 1980, just about being an intern. Finally, I received the 3rd letter and they said, as previously stated, thank you for your letter of, we currently have no position openings, but thank you again for your interest. And it was kind of like, you could tell I had written maybe one too many letters to him. 2 weeks after that, I got a phone call and there was an internship opening. It was the only internship at that period of time in the organization. And because I'd been the most persistent, I got a call, I had an interview, and I got the job. I always use that, Brian, when I talk to people to remind them that there was nothing special about my background or who I was or what I did. But if I didn't send the 2nd letter or the 3rd letter, then I'm not having this conversation with you today. And I pass that along to my son and everybody you talk to. It's about, if you have a dream and a goal, you're persistent and you stay after it in pursuit. And that's really what I did. Then just really, as far as the Angels are concerned, I started as an intern, grew that into the secretary in stadium operations for 2 days. Buzzy Bavasi asked if I was interested to come in to join the PR staff because the secretary had left. So I ended up assuming that role as administrative assistant for a year and then just grew from there. So I look at it, Brian, what really helped me with the career in that aspect of baseball was I got in the door, I took every opportunity that presented itself, and I focused each and every day on making myself better and doing what was best for the organization. And that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Yeah, there's so many amazing things there that you said that like you said, I want our listeners to hear, but that I want to digest as well. I mean, number one, I always think it's amazing when you have someone at a young age that, falls in love with something and that's the dream and that's what I'm going to do and then makes it happen. But it's also important about how you made it happen, right? It was that persistence. It wasn't just, hey, that would be a cool thing to do. Like maybe that can, happen one day. It was more so, no, look, that is going to happen. I'm going to do whatever I can to make sure it does. And that, that effort paid off, which is a really cool thing and a really cool story, I think, for anybody at any level to hear, regardless of age and what you want to do with your life. It's a really cool dream that was fulfilled with you. That is
well. I think, Brian, sometimes that we can try to set our own course and we work hard toward it, but it's also the recognition that other people are going to play a significant role, first and foremost, in the smallest and largest of ways. And then it's also incumbent upon each of us to recognize opportunity. And opportunity isn't always, a high-paying job or something high profile. It's steps and it's measures to get to someplace. And I think my career and some of the people I worked with the Angels and around baseball understood taking those steps. And rather than big leaps, it was continued growth that prepared them for when they got into the leadership role. They were ready for it and they had a clear understanding from top to bottom or bottom to top, which I always think it's much more important to know bottom to top than the latter. And I think it helped me with perspective in everything I've done since.
Sure. And I would say the other thing about opportunity is it's not always going to be obvious, right? Like it's not always going to just fall in your lap, right? I mean, the opportunities for you were there. It doesn't mean that they were just handed to you or even easy to find. You went out and found them. So, opportunity is one of those things that can pop up in a variety of different ways, and sometimes it takes a little effort to see them, but they're important openings to track down. And I'm happy to hear that all came together with you. And I'm also curious to learn more about your career with the Angels, because you were there for decades. I mean, you worked for them for a really long time. And as you said, kind of worked your way up that ladder and ultimately got to be the VP of communications there for a while. And so probably another question that's hard to sum up, but, give us a little bit of insight in what that position was like. What did a typical day look like as in that role? What kind of things, were you responsible for? And maybe what were some of the challenges you had in that role as well?
Well, it's a great question, which we don't possibly have enough time. But the great thing about working on an everyday basis on the club level, particularly in season, is that you can have a plan and you have certain routines of statistics and interviews and who you have to speak with and all. But at the end of the day, you spend more of your day reacting at times than being proactive. And that's not to say that you weren't planning. You didn't plan, but if your club's in a 5-game winning streak, you control your time a little bit more. There's a lot of positivity. People are looking for, just to, a lot of the positive aspects. Conversely, if you've lost 5 straight, the mood's a little bit different. Sometimes you can have a little uncomfortableness with the fan base. Media. It's just a different environment. I always say that if you're in a winning streak, the service at the ballpark, food service in the dining areas is great, and the food is warm. If you've lost 5, 6 straight, that's when you get the complaints. And I think that's sometimes a lot of what went on in that role. The most satisfying aspect of it, Brian, is no 2 days were alike, though you played 162 games and you knew you had a schedule. It's so many different things that come up from, for our role, we had to deal with the players, the media, the public, Major League Baseball, sponsors in the different departments, and then our counterparts from other clubs. So I've said this and probably heard it quoted many times. The great thing about a PR person is ultimately you're a jack of all trades and a master of none, but you're a master being a jack of all trades. And I think that was what the exciting aspect of each day was. In season, you'd get there about 9 o'clock, 9:15, and generally leave 11:30, midnight. And that was just the role. You understood it. If you left the ballpark after you won, there was a little of exhilaration and then kind of an even keeledness about what lies ahead. If the club lost the game that night, there was disappointment, a little bit of frustration, because you just like to finish on that high note, particularly if you had some of those losses, late in the game. But after 40 years, I learned to find that balance that I can honestly say I probably didn't have for about the first dozen or so years. But it's every aspect of it, of the day could be unique, but yet every aspect of the day could be routine, if that makes sense. Because there was different characters and different scenarios, but some of the same requirements of what you had to do.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I mean, every day was different, but responsibilities were kind of stable, right? I mean, you knew things that had to get done. It was just how are you going to get there? How was the day going to unfold? I mean, I had a somewhat of an idea on what a typical day looks like in baseball, and I know that your answer is probably correct, that every day was a little bit different, right? And every day's, you're getting there early, you're there late, but it's rewarding. You enjoy it, and at the end of the day, you enjoy what you're doing. And so, probably a tough question to say what all fell on your plate, because I know it was a lot. But I think that gives us a good start and a good understanding of the environment that you worked in for so long as well. And one of the other things that probably contributed to your environment that I knew a little bit about, but learned some more when I was kind of looking this up, is while you were with the Angels, you worked with Gene Autry. And a lot of our listeners probably know who Gene Autry is. I had learned of the name. I'm almost ashamed to say I had to look up a little bit about everything that he did. But I mean, this guy, an epic performer, right? Singer, songwriter, actor, did a little bit of everything, but also owned that team for a really long time. And I know someone that you learned a lot of lessons from as well. So give us some insight. What was it like working for Gene, and what were those lessons that you learned from him?
Well, I'll tell you, that's a great reflection question. And I will always say Mr. Autry because it was a privilege and an honor and really a blessing working for him. If you go back in history and as you were doing your Google search, there was a point in time Gene Autry was as big in this country as any star or celebrity, period. He's a phenomenal individual. I got to know Mr. Autry really as the owner, and not really the boss, but the owner. And there were times that we flew with him to winter meetings on his plane, and he would talk about the stories. I think one of the great things about him, Brian, was his humility, that he very seldom talked about all the greatness that an accomplishment that he achieved, but his high point and what he enjoyed most were being around ball players. His love of the game was just really immeasurable. Mr. Autry taught us a lot about community involvement, philanthropic efforts, which is part of the reason that I ended up taking this job at the Hall of Fame, is because my boss reminds me a lot of Gene Autry in terms of commitment and understanding of taking care of other people. But he was always dressed to the nines. He didn't travel with an entourage. He'd walk by your office every day on his way to see the general manager, see Buzzy Bavasi or Mike Port. He'd walk in and kind of pop his head in and say, "How you doing, young man?" Because of my role in communications, I was involved in some decisions with managerial changes or front office changes, and he would sit there and he'd lay it out, what we had to do. Never heard him raise his voice. He loved children. He understood the role of the baseball club in a community, and really, Brian, a sports franchise. And I think, when we finally won the World Series in 2002, all of us felt the only missing component is that Mr. Autry wasn't with us to go through it. Yet at the same time, we celebrated Mr. Autry, even though we were under Disney ownership, because of what he meant to the organization, what he meant to this country. I mean, it's a man who supported the military, had a great film and singing career. He took care of children. We hear his songs every Christmas with some of his great tunes. But he was just, I guess if I had to use one word to describe him, genuine.
Yeah, just from hearing you talk, I can tell the role that he played, not just for you, but for many others, probably even outside of the Angels organization, probably anyone that came across him, right? It's just an authentic person that you felt like, even as big as he wasn't any bigger than anyone that he was talking to, right? And that, kind of humility, like you said, can really set the tone for an organization like that. And I know that he was important in your life and to many others as well. And I think that's probably something that I know you're grateful for was that opportunity, and, learn many things from him that you're applying, while you were there, but also at the Hall today. So I definitely wanted to make sure that we had a little bit of time to talk about him and everything that he did for you as a person as well.
Brian, when you look at people like Mr. Autry or just people of status and accomplishment, there's a certain hesitation from people, that maybe don't travel in those circles, if you will, or have not been around those type of individuals. And I think one of the things that Mr. Autry didn't have to try to do, it was just natural, is he disarmed you, that you could sit in that room or you have a discussion with him, and he brought out the best in you in terms of being comfortable talking and asking, so that you didn't say, "Boy, that's Gene Autry. I better be on my not best behavior, but just guarded that I don't say the wrong thing."
Right.
And he wanted you to be comfortable. He wanted you to be natural. He cared when he spoke to you. He was speaking to you, not on a time limit or a clock where you better get it out fast or whatever. He just was, the world would be a better place if there were more Gene Autrys. So I'll just leave it at that.
That makes sense. One of those people, it sounds like, that if you didn't know who he was and you were just sitting there talking with him, you would have no idea that everything that he was into and the impact that he had. And, the roles that he was playing. So it's, those are the kind of people that I'm drawn to as well, that are never bigger than anyone else and don't go outside of themselves regardless of their positions and roles in society. So I'm happy to hear that and happy to learn more about him as well, just myself, which I think is a really cool thing. And one of the things that you mentioned while you were talking about him is that year you won the World Series. And of course, all of you wish he was there, but I'm also curious on the logistical side of that time period, because during your tenure at the Angels, I mean, you handled media and PR for not just that World Series, but, all-star games, a ton of postseason appearances. I guess I'm curious to know, what were those experiences like? Were they exciting? Were they a little bit more frantic and hectic? Was a little bit of both? I mean, any of those things kind of stand out above anything else? Curious what those times were like.
Well, you used a great word when you said frantic, but I think sometimes when we're challenged with positive situations that can seem overwhelming, we probably do our best work and reflect on it with an excitement, because at the end of the day, I don't care what anybody tells you on the club level. This is one thing I will say with absolute: you can't help but be excited when you're playing in October, or that you have an all-star game at some point. It's just, that's what you work for. So yes, there was times that, I made that quote that wasn't unique or original, that, we have plenty of time to sleep in November, or I'll sleep many years from now. I couldn't get enough of the World Series. And yeah, there were times that, the adrenaline, particularly all the traveling you had to do and being a West Coast club, in October was difficult with the travel, but I loved it. I mean, it was the first World Series in the history of the organization. The nice thing about that series, it was the Giants as our opponents. We kept that travel, but we had the Yankees earlier, Minnesota earlier in that season, and then we had all the runs of the division titles, and we had the best press box in baseball as far as I was concerned. We had a great venue, ingress, egress. The staff that I was privileged to work with, from stadium operations and facilities, just wonderful people that we enjoyed the privilege of being postseason. Because I would tell you, Brian, you go through that champagne shower in the clubhouse and you never know if you're going to have another one. So we made the most of it. We really did. And, the request, it's not just the organization that's succeeding. When you're in postseason and you go up that ladder, it's a community that really is getting involved. And there's a lot of outside requests from the local media, then the national media, then different people within your community to get involved. So, and a lot of that period of time for us, initially it started with Disney and then went to Artie Marino, and, the requests came in from all different directions. So you find out a little bit about yourself and your prioritizing abilities. But at the end of the day, all those events that you described were exhilarating. And there are times, it's one aspect I certainly miss, but you close your eyes and you try to go back to what it was, going on the field after Game 7 in 2002 and grabbing guys for the "I'm going to Disney" commercial, getting them for their interviews, or standing down below the dugout steps when when the club wanted its division title or advanced to the LCS. And you remember that feeling as a fan of the organization as well as an employee. So all the challenges that were put forth, you did your best to accommodate everybody. And also, Brian, strike that balance of understanding what it was that you were being a part of. If October was a job for somebody, then they were in the wrong business. And it was never a job for me.
Yeah, I'm sure it was busy, but that's the kind of busy you want. Like you said, I mean, especially someone like you who had just dreamed of doing that, for so long, that's the ultimate goal. And anytime you reach the ultimate goal, I mean, that's what you strive for. And it's one of those things. And I always talk to people about, reaching a goal, that's when all the hard work just pays off, and it's just so rewarding. So I have no doubt that that's something you look back in fondness a lot. Do you still have the ring? Do you still throw it on from time to time, look down and smile when you need a pick-me-up?
You know what? I have so many experiences. It's tough to single one out over the other. I wore the ring every day in 2003 until a new World Series champion was was crowned, because I felt like we were the world champions from '02 through the end of October in '03. And then since then, I'll pull it out for special events and dinners. To tell you the truth, one of the reasons I wore it so often in '03 is I wanted to share it with the fans and all of the people that you cross paths with. You will never have found a picture of me holding out my hand with the ring on it for people to take a picture of. I always took it off and asked them to try it on and take their own photo, because I know what it was like to see a world championship ring from any of the four sports, sitting there and seeing somebody don it, and what it would feel like to have one of your own. And when it's your franchise that's winning, or the team you support, I just felt very, very strongly that other people needed to share that moment in it, and especially kids, Brian, because I think it captures kind of the mystique and the majestic part of what winning is ultimately all about.
Sure. Well, that even goes back a little bit to, what you said before, like, it's a payoff for everyone in the organization. I think that includes fans. They're a part of that whole process too. So to get them involved, I think is a cool thing. It says even more about you as a person. So yeah, all of that I can imagine was, you almost look back, it might have been like a blur, but I'm sure it was one of the most amazing times of your career. I have no doubt. And I want to, while I'm talking about your career, this is probably going to be a fairly sharp left turn here, but there's another, time in baseball that I know you worked through that I want to ask you about. Just kind of correlates to the work that we do at the moment. But, baseball, while it's, come an incredibly long way, I think we all know that there was a time where, steroids ran, fairly rampant through the game, but referred to as a steroid era. And that's, one of the things that I know that you were around during. And so I guess I want to ask you about it just from your perspective, like looking back on that period, what do you remember most? Like, was it something that was being discussed? Was it something that was known? I mean, is there things that we could have done differently with that? I mean, how do you kind of remember that time in baseball from your perspective?
Oh, Brian, great question. And I think that anything, as we learn, whether it's our personal lives, professional lives, we always look back in reflection of maybe what we were perhaps blinded to, or didn't pay enough attention to, or just were neutral on. Certainly for me in my role, when I look back at it, I valued statistics and numbers. I went through Reggie Jackson in 1984 when he hit his 500th, and I remember the research we did. Obviously didn't have computers and that technology to the way we do now. But I remember when he hit his 500th, how historical it was. It's like, I got to be part of history, doing his press conference afterwards and all those things. And then suddenly you went through this period of time where some of those records that it would take years and years to, reach or surpass by some, were being done with more frequency. And you just think, I know everybody's getting stronger and better. I think maybe I was naive because I didn't hear anything really in our clubhouse per se. And then I think Thomas Boswell was one of the first people to bring it up during whatever year in postseason that something's a little bit different. And he was kind of really, if you go back and look at it historically, kind of pushed aside that he brought something up, which turned out to be true. I think it's, everybody fell in love with Sammy and Mark's chase and the breaking of the record. And, there was more to it. I do believe that we focused, in retrospect, an awful lot, or mostly on the power of the home run and what that did and increase those numbers. But I would tell you, Brian, there's players that told me that, the difference of that ground ball into the hole and we call it exit velocity now, but the strength that was achieved with some of the use, it wasn't just about the home runs. Mm-hmm. It's also about how hard you hit the ball and some pitchers, it changed things as well. I look at it, and it's a great question that I ponder what I recognized. I did more reading on it of what people thought than I was aware at the time. And then as time goes on, you start to look at things and the changes in bodies, and then the debate of what was illegal and not legal. Now in the Hall of Fame, we address that period of time. And then obviously the Mitchell report's present as well. And I think for me, after that investigation, that's what really, Brian, opened my eyes to what transpired. And I've had to reference it a couple times in Cooperstown, and probably at some point need to read it thoroughly, like you would one of the most important books in the history of whatever it is that you do, in terms of understanding the period of time, the results in involvement. But I think it's an unfortunate time in reflection. But I also believe, as the great efforts of the Taylor Hooten Foundation and all that you stand to represent, it's a part of history that we have to learn and grow from, and protect the present and the future from mistakes of the past.
Yeah, I think it's one of those situations that's easy to look back, hindsight's 2020, and say, well, how did people not know this was going on? How was this not stopped or not discussed earlier? I mean, it's always easy to look back at history that way. And I'm sure, say naive, I'm sure that was a word that was, would be used by several people that were in that position. So it's a tough question to look back and say, oh, what could we have done, or what happened? What should we have done? I do know this, I know we're super proud of Major League Baseball for the steps they did take. I mean, to me, hands down, the most stringent drug testing policy, the strictest if you get caught, in any of the professional sports, and the game has just changed. And one of the things we'll talk about later is a lot of the players that have really, stepped up and spoken up and wanting to clean up the game and wanting to be positive role models. So it's, one of those things, of course, you can always do the revisionist history thing, but I like to look at it now more nowadays. Okay, well, we learned a lot of lessons from that, and some good did come from it. And we're seeing that, in the game today. And I think that's one of the things that I try to take out of it when I always talk about that period as well.
Brian, I think that's an excellent point, because at some point, there was a lot of broad stroking of that's everyone's doing it type mentality. And, there was a large portion. Will we ever know how many? No, we won't. And there's speculation and all. But at the end of the day, we learn. And if we look at a lot of different things that have transpired, look, COVID, how we worked and handled things, in March and April and May, is certainly changed in how we're handling things now in December. And it's been devastating, and it's been political, and it's been controversial, and all that. But at the end of the day, we're going to learn and get better for it. And I think that's important. And I also strongly believe it's not brushing anything aside, but we don't have all the answers at times when something is right in the midst of us. We have to react, we have to respond, and we have to grow from it, learn from it. And that's why what you guys are doing is so very, very important, because you can look at it, 30 years ago, but that 30 years, the things that have transpired and had an effect and change, or 20 plus years ago, it's just very important. It's very important that you put such events or such situations in perspective and learn from it. And I agree 100% with what the game has done and grown. And it's been a mutual effort between the players, the leagues, and everybody that runs the game of baseball. And I think that the players themselves reached a point of, I had a pitcher tell me that he stood on the mound one time and he knew that somebody in the batter's box was a user, and the guy on deck had used. And he goes, I stood out there and questioned myself, do I have the arsenal to get through these two? Because he was aware that there was just something a little bit different. Those are situations that were tough on people. So there were a lot of challenges even amongst the constituency of the players themselves. And at the end of the day, I think everybody did the right thing.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I say, let's not act like the past didn't happen, but I like to focus on how are we learning from that. Those complex situation, there was a lot that went into it and a lot that we'll never know, like you said. But dwelling on that, I'm not sure does us a lot of good. Discussing it and learning from it, I think that's the proper next steps. And I know something that baseball has done for sure. And we appreciate that. And try to do our best with that as well. And I guess to take that one step further, I think that could kind of actually transition us into, more discussion about the Hall of Fame. You kind of started your answer there when I asked you about that era about stats and numbers. And this is a question that, is thrown around everywhere on every sports channel. Is always a debate. And this isn't a question that I want to get you in trouble with. So if it is, just let me know. But, there's just a lot of discussion talking about what do we do with known steroid users getting into the Hall of Fame. It comes up every year on ballots and voting and percentages and stuff. Do you have an opinion on that, or are you allowed to say that? I mean, should they get in? How should we handle that? I mean, it's a situation that we're continuing to face. So what do you think are the next steps with that?
Well, I think it's not always clear cut, and I would say that there is a process. First and foremost, it starts with election. The Hall of Fame doesn't set up, its rules. Obviously, there's criteria for election, and we talk performance, its integrity, sportsmanship, respect of the game, how you conducted yourself. You have to go through, first and foremost, Brian, there's a process before you even get to, the Hall of Fame being involved, if you will. And that's, you have the BBWA vote. And that's a conversation that can go on 10 years if you register at least 5 votes. And certainly with a couple of the gentlemen on there right now that are entering their 9th year, it will be interesting to see what the outcome is in the next 2 years. If you maintain those votes but don't attain 75%, then you are eventually transferred over into or rotated in, transitioned, if you will, to possible vote by the Veterans Committee, where that is made up of Hall of Famers, club executives, some ownership, certainly, and then historians and writers. It's a 16-person panel. So obviously everybody has their opinions. The Hall, our vice chairman, the late Joe Morgan, had voiced his thoughts a couple years ago about steroids. It's an individual decision, ultimately, on the people that vote. The Hall doesn't set up the criteria of influence, I guess is the word I'm looking for in that regard. I think we all feel very strongly, we have not turned our back on, as I mentioned earlier, on our exhibit and our mentioning and kind of the historical perspective of steroids. But I think ultimately when all is said and done, the game itself is going to take care of that. And, the Mitchell report plays a bigger role. Admission by some folks who were involved plays a big role. And, when you have an electorate, Brian, it's interesting to see what they think themselves. And again, there's the criteria for getting in, but how different people define that. And if you look at the current ballot, there are people that have been associated or associated in articles and allegations and all. And it will be up to the individual voters to vote for it when all is said and done.
Yeah, well, that's how I knew that question wasn't putting you too much on the spot, because I'm aware of the process to get in there. But I don't know that everyone is, right? I mean, the Hall of Fame is not the ones determining who's in and who's out, right? There's a process well outside of you guys that then it gets handed off to you. So it's not like you're the one deciding. If let's say one of those players does get in, that's not really even your call that was made, right? And I think that's important to know.
Right, and really, there's we have some different language now that goes on in the plaque gallery, and it goes back to the past, not just the present. We're tackling right now some social injustice issues that I think 2020 have brought forth, and we go back to segregation in the game and some people that were perhaps a little bit more involved in that role, if you will. And we acknowledge that the inductees or the electees that are in the plaque gallery were judged at the period of time by the voters based on, their sentiments about the individual, and the totality of the careers and the lives of the individuals who are inducted in Cooperstown. It's available in our resources in the library and the museum itself to tell different stories. But we don't acknowledge, or we do acknowledge, that the historical perspective of different things that have happened to people. And again, we don't turn our back on that. But in terms of influencing who goes in, that is not the Hall's role. And that's why when you look at the other thing that the Veterans Committee, for example, Brian, it's not the same 16 people every year, that will, unfortunately, we've had to cancel this year because of COVID. But next December, when we gather, it will be a different 16-person panel than it was in 2019. So that there's not a consistent group that builds up perhaps a bias. There's an objectivity, different opinions, different perspectives. That's all part of it, and it comes from ownership, executive, writers, historians, and Hall of Famers themselves. And we think at the end of the day, that makes for great dialogue, conversation, perspective, personal feelings, not just objectivity. All comes for a good discussion, and ultimately a final vote. If you don't make it in from the writers, that you make it in a 75% ballot from the Veterans Committee, which is very difficult to do.
Yeah, there's a lot that goes into it, and that's what I wanted our listeners to know, that, look, this isn't the Hall making the call here, right? I mean, it's almost handed off to you, and I know you guys are, involved with the process or aware of the process, but there's a lot that goes into it before we get to that point. So that's why it's important to know, and I think that's also kind of transitions us straight into a really good next question for you, and to kind of further explain to our listeners on what the Hall really is. I mean, this is also one of those questions that could take us a while to discuss if we wanted to, but I mean, from your perspective as the president there, at the end of the day, what does the Hall of Fame really stand for? There's so many components to what you guys are and what you guys do. But if you had to boil it down, what would you say is the mission of the Hall of Fame at the end of the day?
Brian, the mission is really, it's preserving the sport's history. It's honoring the excellence within the game of particular individuals, and it's connecting the generations. So it is one of the primary reasons. The love of the game itself is what drew me to make the toughest decision of my life, quite honestly. When you walk in there, you're in the hallowed halls. You walk in there where it's as really strive to be as non-political as absolutely possible. We try to tell the stories with absolute fact-based outcomes and results. Only about 10% of what our collection is visible at any given time as we continue to collect artifacts. One of the big things about the Hall is we try to tell stories. So it might not, the artifact we collect might seem a little. We have Dr. Fauci's mask, for example. We have Dino Ebel's mask he wore as coaching third base for the Dodgers. So it's not the bat, it's not a ball or a jersey, but it's something that tells a story. We're going to have kits that the players had to take for their COVID testing, because at some point, years from now, 2020 is going to be a pretty interesting case study and storytelling opportunity for us. But ultimately, it's when you walk in there, if you're 16, 17, maybe a little bit younger, certainly every 12-year-old that walks in there knows who Babe Ruth is. But we need them to understand the origin of the game, or try to encourage them to understand the origin of the game in the history of it. It's not just about the present, almost what you and I were talking about earlier on steroids. You need to understand the history of how something happens and how the game evolves. One of the exciting things is Ichiro Suzuki has been as an active player, he visited Cooperstown 7 times and was dear friends with my predecessor, Jeff Idelson. Part of the reason he traveled to Cooperstown was his love of the history of the game. and how it's grown and evolved. And part of that's the equipment, that to realize Ty Cobb didn't have a new pair of Nikes every day. He was stealing all those bases and all the different changes in the evolution of catching gear and gloves and all. And we'd love to produce the desire for more players to come and learn the history of the craft that they practice today. And that's very, very important, while also educating kids of the story of baseball. And I think it's important that people realize that Cooperstown is not just, the gathering of legacies of 333 individuals. It's the story of the game. And there have been over 20,000 plus players that have played our great game. We're the home to that story, for both the past, the present, and preparing for the future. And we deal with things, some tough issues, obviously against steroids, but we also deal with racial injustice. And you look there was a period of 60 years of Major League Baseball of integration before Jackie Robinson. That story is being enhanced even now as we speak, and upgrading it through 2020. And there's some exciting things on the horizon in that regard as well. So it's education. It's not just a museum. It's a learning opportunity. I always encourage people to go to the library and research a topic or subject that they want to know more about that maybe was generated from a visit or an exhibit at the hall. It's just a wonderful opportunity to learn the depths of a lot of different topics.
It really is an amazing place. You mentioned your predecessor, Jeff. Jeff was really awesome several years ago and welcomed me up there for a visit. And I was just, in awe being a baseball fan. But even if you aren't, it's an incredible place. I think what you said that sums it up best is it tells a story. That's exactly what it does, right? It tells the story of baseball, and there's just so much to see there. I mean, he even took me to the back, like you said, and kind of showed me everything that's even not on display, and that might even be more incredible than what the actual stuff that you can walk past. It's an amazing place. I'll put the Hall of Fame website in the show notes so you guys can kind of go see everything that they have and all that you guys do. But it's an incredible, everybody has to go to Cooperstown. I don't care if you're a baseball fan or not. It's one of the coolest places in our country. And I know all the work that you guys do to keep it that way. So really, really a special place, I know, for you, for me, but for many other people as well. Being there for a little bit now, like, any personal favorite memorabilia items that you have that, maybe ties back to a favorite player or something that you grew up watching, anything that you kind of think is the coolest thing in there?
Well, I'll tell you, that's great, because people say, what's your favorite item? And I could just ask Brian, and it's easy to say a couple things, but I realize I'm in an institution where the great moments of the game have been captured. So it's almost kind of like saying who your favorite player is. It's difficult, but I would say when you walk in and you see Babe Ruth's uniform and jersey, and you imagine, he's one of the few people in the history of sports, not just baseball, that there's really a mystique to, Babe Ruth, bigger than life. You see those videos and you just realize, my goodness. And then you see who he was as a person to kids and charity and community and all that. So every time I walk by and I stop and I read a placard a little bit more, so that maybe someday I'll have memorized every placard in the building. I stop and imagine what it was like. I had the privilege of knowing Babe Ruth's roommate, Jimmy Reese, who was our coach with the Angels for a long, long time. And I heard a lot of the Ruth stories. But then I walk around and I see Hank Aaron, his chase, and the story that exhibit tells about Hank's career, all the trials and tribulations and breaking the record, and what he was faced by, unfortunately, a certain segment of society with all the negative letters and the hate mail, and how he endured and how he went on to remain such a great ambassador for the game. But it's really a lesson in perseverance. And I remember sitting at the kitchen table when, in April, when he broke the record and hit the home run against Al Downing, how excited I was. So to see some of the artifacts from that and see his jersey and really have a clear understanding of his history, those are two of the most exciting things for me. And then we have a picture of the Angels winning the World Series and that magic moment on the mound. And every time I come out and see that photo, yeah, it's a little exhilarating on a personal level for me.
I was waiting for you to say that Angels photo, right? I knew that had to be on the list. Hank Aaron's was on my list. I'm a Braves fan. I grew up in Georgia, so he's that mystique. That's what I get when I kind of see what he did as well. But yeah, yes. Those are tip of the iceberg to everything you guys can see. It's pretty amazing, and like you said, some of those players that you just are iconic and have generation after generation remain that way is a really cool thing to look at. And I want to round out our conversation talking about players, but I guess transitioning a little bit back to, how the game of baseball has changed since the steroid era, because you really partnered with us on something that we call our All Me League. And to give our listeners a little bit of background on what that is, I mentioned a little while ago that there's a lot of players that wanted to clean up the game and wanted to be positive role models. Well, as our foundation, our mission has always been to educate. But, several years ago, we decided, okay, well, we want to educate, but we also want to inspire at the same time. And how do we do that? Well, let's get together with Major League Baseball, one of our, longest and best partners, and maybe come up with an idea on how can we provide positive role models to our youth? How can we give people, something to strive for, something to look up for that, hey, I can achieve this and I can do it the right way. And so we started the All Me League, which now has grown, even past baseball with a ton of different athletes, but it started in Major League Baseball. And we went around and we started, talking to teams, and we said, hey, do you guys know anybody that might want to be involved with this? And you were one of the first people that actually helped us get one of our very first players, and that was CJ Wilson, who was an Angel at the time. And so he's remained supportive throughout the years. And, all of that was very integral to us getting this program off the ground. So take us back to that time a little bit. What do you remember from that? Why was that something that you wanted to help with? Why did you think that All Me program was an important thing to get involved with?
Well, Brian, first and foremost, I looked at it separate of my role in communications. I just think what you were putting together was just the right thing to do because of its effect on future generations. I just think it was important. And I recall very vividly approaching CJ in the clubhouse in Tempe during spring training and talking to him about it. And it wasn't even a sales job from me or a convincing, if you will. It was absolutely. I mean, CJ had an interest in participation right from the get-go, and it was important to him. And I tell you, I've known a lot of athletes through the years. CJ had the ability to balance a hectic schedule and participation as well as anybody I've really known. And this was important to him. It wasn't just something he could put on the resume or kind of check the box. It was very important to CJ to get involved. And when he makes a commitment, he doesn't just readily say, yeah, I'll do that, and just kind of, like you say, check the box. It's full participation. And that to me was exciting as anything, Brian, that commitment. And I always try to focus on that, try to find the right match of person for whatever the request might be, particularly with a charity. But I think this is more than just a charity. I think this was just education and importance. And look, we acknowledge this, that celebrity and status opens the door in the ears of other people and for listening and understanding. And CJ was articulate. He's an emphatic person. He's a passionate individual. And I just think it was the right match. When the program was started and I first heard about it, and Major League Baseball put out the release of the Taylor Hooten Foundation, I thought it was great to have baseball support on such a grand scale. And I think it was just important for society. And I even prior to this phone call and talking to Don through the years and connecting, I'm very respectful of everything that you continue to do and have done, because a lot of times you may never know the life you saved because that person made a decision not to delve into something or go down the wrong path. But the effect you've had and the results, I think, are just very, very self-explanatory. And I think everybody that joined the All Me program feels very much the same way, that it is really a privilege and an honor to be part of it.
Yeah, well, number one, thank you for those kind words. We appreciate that. It's been really cool to see that program grow every year to the point where we have guys, even multiple guys on every single team now. And what's also really cool, like you just said, is all the guys that step up and do this, CJ included, they want to. They're volunteering. It's not like we go to the teams and say, "Hey, can you ask so and so?" We put it out to the teams, and if someone wants to, they hop on board. And what that creates is a group of guys that really want that message to happen and believe in it and want to be those role models. And I think that's the coolest thing of all of this is like no one's twisting any arms here. You just got so many guys that continue to grow and provide that positive message and have that positive conversation with the people that look up to them. That's just the coolest thing. So we appreciate you helping us get one of our first. And I know that's where our relationship kind of first got started. And you've been super supportive along the way ever since. And we truly appreciate that and everything you've kind of helped us with and continue to do so. And so we look forward to, continuing to work with you on other things as well, even beyond our conversation today. And I do want to end our conversation today with actually a couple of curveball questions, which I guess that analogy makes sense since we're talking about baseball so much. I know I sent you a lot of things that ahead of time that I wanted to talk with you, but we always ask our guests a couple of, let's say, fun questions at the end. Just we've had a lot of heavy conversation here as well. So we'll end with a couple quick ones. All right. And here's your first one. I took the idea of baseball since that's our whole theme here and want to throw this one at you. If you were a player, right, let's put you on the other side of the coin. Would you rather have grown up and been a power pitcher or a power hitter, right? Like, let's say your choice. You can hit 40 bombs a year or you can hit 102 on the radar gun. Which one are you picking?
That's a great call. I'd rather have been Nolan Ryan. Yeah, definitely the pitcher. I just think you set a tone. I think you're geared up when you go out there. Used to be every 4 days, but every 5 days, the focus is on you. The team is just so much relying on you. Just a small, you have to succeed. I just think the pressure's differently. So I'd rather have been able to throw the fastball and not just throw it, but control it.
Yeah, that's the harder part, I think, half the time. But and plus, you have the advantage, right? Like the odds are in your favor. You know what's coming. The hitter has to adjust, which is why they're successful 30% of the time, and that's a high mark.
And Brian, it's also the thought process. I mean, the mano competition, the thinking, certainly working with your catching and signs, but just that the confidence that you have something. Again, I alluded to this earlier. You have something in your arsenal that that is better than the best of the arsenal on the other end of this competition with the guy at the plate.
Yeah.
I could throw 100, 102. I like my chances.
All right. I was thinking hitter, I guess, because modern day, I was like, man, if I was a power hitter, that means like I'm going to be crushing it in the softball beer leagues till I'm like 60 years old, right? So I was thinking long term, but there's probably
that's good reasoning.
There's probably no wrong answer to that question, though. All right, last one. So you're one of the few people I know that made a transition from one place that couldn't be more different than the place you went to, and I'm talking about LA, Southern California, moving to Cooperstown, New York. And I've been to both of those places, so I know how different they are. We could spend time talking about the differences. I guess my question is, like, what's one of the differences between the two that you didn't expect, like that kind of surprised you when you made that move?
Oh, I think it's the fact that I needed parkas. So I have my warmer, and warmest parkas. And I have not had a parka in Southern California here in 51 years. So that was a difference. But ultimately, the traffic, it's just, we have traffic jams in Cooperstown if you have 3 people at a stop sign. That's about it. So it's an adjustment in lifestyle. But I think, quite honestly, Brian, it's for me, it's been an adjustment from, the everyday hustle and bustle of the game I love and working on the club level. But I've actually taken more pictures of outside nature and scenery with the beautiful woods and the lake and things. I've kind of slowed down to enjoy, to truly stop and smell the roses a little bit.
Yeah, I'm like, as you're talking, I'm picturing you like shopping for jackets and like asking for help because you know that haven't done it in so long. But yeah,
well, a scraper for the car and the snow shovel. Yeah, a couple things like that have been included.
Oh man. Well, I know that, no, both of those places are really actually amazing places. And I know that Cooperstown is a special place in its own right, and a really cool place that, like I said, everybody should go to. And I also know that, the Hall has got a really good one in you, and I know that a lot of great things are still to come with the Hall of Fame with you at the helm. So, I applaud all the great work you did with the Angels and will continue to do there. And just thank you for your support over the years and for your time in doing this. I know our listeners will enjoy this, and I appreciate you taking the time to hang with us.
Brian, really the privilege has been mine, and I continue to support and respect and congratulate all of you and your listeners and supporters of this most important project. I mean, we say every charity and every foundation is important in its own right, but this one in particular is important because it's just its effect on the long term for youth. And it's not even young people, it's high school, college kids, obviously, but the earlier you can learn the messages of what not to do and to avoid and educate yourself, you're making true contributions to society. And my hat's off and salute to all of you.
Well, we appreciate those kind words. We're making an impact, and education is what we're all about, but we can't do it with help, and we can't do it without support from people like you and Major League Baseball and a lot of people that we feel privileged to have on our side. So thanks again for being on that side and being supportive along the way. And Tim, I look forward to crossing paths with you again soon, hopefully in person at the Hall of Fame. I'm due for another visit someday. So thanks again for everything.
Ryan, I look forward to it, and the red carpet awaits you.
Well, that's it for today's show. Thanks for listening to the All Me podcast from the Taylor Hooten Foundation, a nonprofit organization leading a national campaign to enlighten people to the truths about appearance and performance-enhancing substances and inspiring people to live and compete without the use of these substances. Please be sure to subscribe to our podcast and tune in to our next episode.